Okay, so I want to show you guys how to do some really simple decreasing and increasing on your cloth just to get your cloth growing gradually bigger. So this is really where you would use this to move one stitch in. So if you had 20 stitches on the machine and you wanted to go to 19, you would move one stitch in. If you had 20 stitches on the machine and wanted to go to 21, you would move one stitch out. There are other methods we use for moving, increasing or decreasing by many stitches, but this works for just one. You can also kind of use it for two, but it's best for one. So I'm going to do the decrease first. That's fairly straightforward. So I'm going to take my one prong transfer tool and I'm going to hold it horizontal and slip the eye over my needle. Now, this is parallel to the floor, my tool, and I'm going to pull it all the way back. And I use this finger here to hold my stitch down. Otherwise, it could really easily get split by this little guy right here. So I just hold, my finger holds the stitch next to the machine and it kind of holds it down a little bit so it doesn't pop up and then get split by the latch. So I'm going to pull this all the way out and that pulls my stitch behind this latch and then I'm going to push it all the way back in, and I don't need to use a hand on the needle to do this. I can just use my transfer tool. And see how, I'll show you this again. This is open now. As I slide it back, my stitch goes in the little divot that's on the needle and underneath that latch, and it closes the latch. So now, when I slide all the way back, that stitch can just slide right up over the latch and onto my tool. And I want to be really careful here. So I'm going to push it all the way back. And right now, if I start sort of like fooling around with this, this stitch is like in the danger zone. So I want to be really careful that I'm pretty conscientious and responsible that I don't accidentally drop it off my tool. So I like to take my tool and then make it go vertical. So it's going straight up and down. It's now perpendicular to the floor. And then I just take it and I scoot it over in front of this gate peg. And then I make sure that my latch on this needle is open if it's not already. And then I can slide my hook from my transfer tool onto the hook on my needle, the eye from the transfer tool onto the hook of the needle, hold it horizontal again, and then I can just, with the flip of my wrist, flick this guy up, and I've got 2 stitches on this needle, no stitches on this needle, and I really want to make sure, I'll turn the camera for a second here, that the butt of this needle I just took my stitch off of, it has to be all the way back here in position A. If it's forward even just a little bit, my carriage is going to think that I want to use it, and it's going to throw a new stitch on it when it goes by. So you push it all the way back. Okay. Now I'm going to knit a couple of rows. So you can kind of see that this new stitch has 2 loops for its turtleneck there. Those are the 2 old stitches from the previous row, whereas the one behind it just has 1. That's regular. These are the 2 from the previous row. So I'm going to knit a few more rows. Doesn't really matter what side my carriage is on for increasing and decreasing, but I'm going to put it on the left just to kind of keep it out of my way. Now, I'm just going to point out, see how these stitches, each of them has this little turtleneck. And that turtleneck is basically when I make a new stitch, the old row slips off of the needle and sits here on the new stitch. So you can see every one of these. Is it a little turtleneck? Okay, we're going to use that turtleneck in a minute. So now I'm going to do an increase. So it's the same kind of thing. The first thing I have to do is move my stitch. So I put my transfer tool horizontal. I connect the eye of the transfer tool onto the hook of my outside stitch. And I pull it all the way back. I use my finger to hold it close to the machine. I push it all the way forward. That makes the stitch scoop underneath the hook. It closes the latch of the hook. And then the stitch is free to slide off onto my transfer tool. Again, I just turn it so it's vertical, and then I scoot over one, so out one. I'm adding a stitch this time, and then I connect it to the new needle here that I want to add. And then I pull. I can pull it all the way out if I want to. I can leave it here, just flick this guy up like that. In the next row, I'll show you pulling it all the way out. So here's the important thing now. There's no stitch on this needle here. I can put this needle into working position, and when the carriage comes across, it'll put a new stitch on it, but as you'll learn, that's going to create a picot. There'll be a little hole there. But I don't want to have a hole. I want to have solid cloth. So what I have to do is I have to put a base stitch on it. So I'm going to take my transfer tool and I'm going to slip it up into the turtleneck of the inside stitch. So not the turtleneck of the stitch I moved, that's really important. The turtleneck of the inside stitch. And I'm just going to scoot it over, always staying in front of these gate pegs here. So I'm just going to scoot it over and then put my tool horizontal, flick my wrist. I use my finger to hold that down. Boom. So now that guy has a little base. This one's on my new needle, and I'm going to knit across. Gets my edge there. And you can see I've got a new stitch. So I'm going to knit a couple more rows. And I'll show you that one again. Increases are a little bit trickier. There's an extra step to them, adding the base stitch onto the empty needle, but I take my transfer tool, I put the eye in the hook, hold it horizontal, pull it all the way out towards me, push it all the way back in, go vertical, switch it over one stitch, go horizontal. Now I can, if I want to, pull this out all the way, if that's easier. When you get doing more complicated knitting, that's going to mean something. Having this needle all the way out is going to tell the machine whether or not to do something. So it's best to get into the habit of doing your transfer and keeping your needle right up here in A position. But to start, if you are more comfortable pulling it all the way out, that's totally fine. So now I've got to put something on this needle here. So I take my transfer tool, I put it on the turtleneck, I scoot it over, always coming in front of those gate pegs, never behind them. If I go behind, it'll get stuck. And then I put my transfer tool on my needle. I just flick this up. I had to give it a little bit of a side movement there because my camera's right here, but generally you just try and flick it up as straight as you can. Hold that on. There's a new stitch. With this being all the way out, I just leave it where it is. When my carriage comes across, it's going to set it back in normal position. But if I push it back in, see how the stitch goes under the latch? And it's going to close that latch if I pull it all the way back in. And then when the carriage comes across, it's going to drop this stitch. So just if you pull a needle out by accident or on purpose, just leave it all the way out until you have knit the row. There you go. And decrease, I put my eye here on the needle. I think I told you guys I was going to do a decrease first, but I did an increase. Sorry about that. Pull it all the way out towards me, push it all the way back in, go vertical, I scoot over one, I put it back on the needle, and then I keep my finger here. This finger has pretty much not moved. I use it to hold things down, slip it on, good to go. And that's it. If I want to do it on the other side, I just do the exact same thing, but for decreases. And see that one, I didn't hold it down well, and you can see, it's great, how that got sort of split, and now it can be kind of tricky to get off the needle. So that's because I didn't hold it down. It popped up a little bit as the latch was opening. Okay, so I'm going to decrease, push this so the needle is all the way back. Come in for the decrease. Knit a couple rows. I'm always checking those edges and fixing them a little bit. And then for the increase, put my tool on, all the way out, all the way in, vertical, scoot over one, put the eye of the tool onto the hook, pull it in, flip it up, barely really moving my hand in the tool. And then I take the turtleneck again from the inside stitch, not from the stitch I just moved, from the inside stitch. I'm going to pop him up on here, and then press. And that's it. Simple one stitch increases and decreases. There are like everything. There's other ways to do this that have a different aesthetic quality that we'll learn later, but for now, this is a simple, easy way to do it. If you want to go ahead and explore other ways of doing it, you're more than welcome to, but this is a good standby to use.